This video is now in session, and were the pundits wrong? Did DeSantis actually do well in the first debates? Well, we're going to take a look at that in this video because we ourselves in the past two videos have stated that DeSantis lost the debate and that he doesn't have much of a chance for victory, if any. So, according to Fox News, they conducted a poll before and after the first debate, and what they found among 400 likely Iowan Republican caucus goers is that his support increased from 14% to 21% after the first debate. Meanwhile, you also have Ramaswamy, who many thought had actually gained from that debate. People considered him as a placeholder for core Trump voters. And this wouldn't really mean much because it's not a true poll, and so it doesn't have the same kind of quality or randomness or sample procedures that you may find in a regular poll. But this is supported by a similar style of polling from 538 and Ipsos. They conducted this nearly similar poll among a number of panelists, and they found that Ron DeSantis did better than expected. You can see here he actually performed the best out of any of these candidates according to the voters from the 538 polling. And so what explains for this? Well, we can look back at history and see what happened in 2020. There are multiple ways to interpret this. You can interpret this as DeSantis not doing with DeSantis not doing well in the debates, as he should have been doing. He should have had a standout moment in order to go against the first place person right now, Donald Trump. But you can also interpret this as a race instead for second place. A race for second place to then go against Donald Trump. And in that respect, DeSantis still does lead that race, somewhat similar to how Joe Biden led his race in the Democratic primary. And you see here that voters after that debate, Democratic voters, thought that he did worse than the trend line here between favorability and debate performance. In terms of his actual performance, he did worse than Sanders, Harris, Warren, Booker, and Castro. That's a lot of different other candidates, and yet he still ended up on top because his shining moment came in the couple of debates before South Carolina. In fact, it was really the debate in South Carolina where he actually did start shining. So it took a while for him, but because he was first place at that time and because he did have a strong core group of voters, he was able to last it out and then have that shining moment when everyone was starting to vote and when every caucus was beginning. And that might be DeSantis' strategy, to not have to go through these fire line attacks from other candidates and just simmer it out, leaves the fight into other people, and then has his shining moment when it comes time. There are risks that come to that, though, and I still don't really deviate from what I said in the first two videos after the debate, which is that DeSantis didn't quite do that well in the debate. That can be true, and DeSantis voters and Republicans can think otherwise. But in terms of attracting new voters, there's not much that has changed after the first debate, generally because everyone was fighting against each other, and generally because you didn't have a standout moment from DeSantis to truly counter that. And the other thing is DeSantis has many flaws within his campaign. Sure, he does attract a unique group of both some Trump voters who voted for him in 2016 but not confident in him in 2024. And then you also have voters who were forever uncomfortable with Trump and not really willing to genuinely support him. He has that group, and no other candidate has that group. But the thing is, for him to actually win this primary, he'll need every other candidate's vote here and then some Trump votes, or he needs a lot of Trump votes. And both scenarios are highly unlikely to happen. So then isn't that the same, you might ask, as any other candidate? I did say after that debate that Haley does have a potential and that Ramaswamy is the only candidate who could actually win against Trump. Ramaswamy, I still think, is the only candidate who can win against Trump, qualified in the sense, or I guess in the sense that if no other candidate can go against Trump, besides Ramaswamy, if he's the only opposition candidate, then he'll win. But that's, again, unlikely to happen. And if you have DeSantis then going against Trump, then I don't think you can necessarily replicate that kind of scenario with Ramaswamy and Trump individually. And so, what is the strategy for DeSantis if he wants to win? Well, first, he has to improve his weaknesses. Some people view him as self-centered, false confidence, questionable. It's just sad he's kind of scary, questionable, maybe in 4 years. The thing is, a lot of this comes from his authenticity or lack thereof, and his debate performance or his speech performance, and not doing well under impromptu scenarios that he hasn't had to practice with before the debates. So if you remember in the debates, some situations include when he smiled after several questions. He smiled somewhat awkwardly. And then also when he was asked about abortion, when he was asked about climate change with yes or no questions, he did not answer with a yes or no. And that is somewhat similar to how a politician operates, and that doesn't bode well for him. The other thing is that Trump can start attacking DeSantis as a politician. It's very easy for him to do that, considering that DeSantis was a politician. Between 2015 to 2023, he's held multiple positions, and he's adjusted his thinking over the years to curry favor with the voters that he needs at that time. And at this time, he needs a careful mix of voters, which is very hard to do. But if there is one scenario that I think that DeSantis could win under, it would be this. There would be no other candidates except Trump, Ramaswamy, and DeSantis. Trump starts going into the debates, and he doesn't perform that well in it, which could be it is viable, considering that if you watch his interviews in 2023 and compare it to 2015, you'll notice that he focuses more on himself rather than on the policies or issues, hot button issues that would activate his base. Things like immigration or abortion or trade. Those issues, Trump doesn't focus that much anymore. He focuses on himself with his criminal trials. And sure, he can connect it to the swamp and how the political establishment fears that he's going to go against, that he's going to win, and so they're targeting against him. But the thing is, if you focus on that one issue, he becomes a single issue politician in that regard, and that never works out. So if that happens, then maybe Ramaswamy might get some support from those Trump voters. He might think Trump did well for us, but in the end, we need someone who can actually fight in this climate. And so they might go to Ramaswamy. And if you look at the result of the debate, you'll see that a lot of these voters from 538, they had less interest in Donald Trump after the debate and more interest in Ramaswamy, which means that Ramaswamy could theoretically take away votes from Donald Trump. Now, if you had no other candidate on the debate platform, if they all endorsed DeSantis, then you would have this split in the Trump vote between Ramaswamy and Trump, and then you would have the rest of the establishment vote, every other vote, and then even a few Trump votes that you had from the very start. And that could make Ron DeSantis win. But that is a highly unlikely scenario because Trump would understand that if he has to go against Ramaswamy, he will go against Ramaswamy and take him down. Trump still has a considerable influence over the Republican voters, many Republican voters. And Ramaswamy has to play it perfect. He can't come across as too egotistic or as a young fellow who can't appeal to older voters. And so there's a lot of variables in that, but there's also a lot of variables in DeSantis as well. You have Nikki Haley, who did well in that debate, and her favorability, her considerations drastically grew from 30.2% to 46.7% of Republican voters in this poll are now considering Nikki Haley. And if you look at the mix between her favorability versus unfavorability ratings, you see here she didn't really go down in unfavorability ratings, or she didn't increase at all, but she increased drastically in her favorability ratings. See here for DeSantis, he's already reached near his climax of his unfavorable versus favorable ratings, which would mean he has to work harder, not only to say why these people who don't have an opinion should support him, but also try to persuade why people are. He has to then understand why people who are unfavorable to him are unfavorable to him, and then have to shift his messaging to get more of those voters across to him. So DeSantis still has also a lot of challenges on his end, which is why I think that DeSantis isn't going to be able to, in the end, win against Trump. If you have just Ramaswamy and Trump, then people who are in the establishment will say, Ramaswamy is at least the better of those two. But if you have DeSantis, Haley, Ramaswamy, and Trump, you will have the establishment not agree on which candidate is the best. And that's because Republicans generally cannot agree on a candidate. If you look at 2015 to 2016, many of those candidates were not willing to back down even after the New Hampshire primaries. And that caused Trump to stay above the fray. And we could see the same thing here, especially because the primary season will also mark the start of his criminal trials, which means that many establishment candidates will think, well, Trump might actually get less support once those criminal trials start, and maybe Trump voters might rethink themselves. So I should still stay in just in case people might come to me. So that kind of scenario is highly likely to happen, considering Republican presidential candidates in 2016, 2012, 2008. So in that respect, DeSantis, sure, he stayed above the fray, but as soon as he gets down to earth and gets down to answering questions that he isn't quite used to, then that's when the real challenges start coming for him. So that's the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed it. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.